Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise and get straight to the critical knowledge.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into the human brain, the central command center, the master strategist, and just the most complex piece of organic machinery in the known universe.
It really is the ultimate supercomputer, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When you look at the raw numbers, the complexity is, well, it's almost impossible to grasp.
Yeah.
We're talking about 20 billion neurons, but the real power is in their connectivity. A single one of those neurons can process input from up to 200,000 different sources simultaneously.
200,000.
That level of input processing is what separates our wetware from any digital computer out there.
Our sources lay out a fantastic roadmap for this complex organ. They start with its development from the embryonic prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon.
Right, which then differentiate into the 6 major adult regions.
Yeah. And our mission today is to walk you through those 6 regions: the medulla oblongata, pons, mesencephalon, diencephalon, cerebellum, and the cerebrum, and outline not just their location, but their essential functions. And we'll be sure to highlight the clinical takeaways from our source material.
We're moving from the essential survival systems deep inside, outward to the areas that handle abstract thought and language. But before we get to function, we have to talk about security.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the layers of defense. Because an organ this vital needs some serious protection, we have 4 main mechanisms keeping the brain safe, right?
That's right. First, you've got the hard exterior,
Okay.
the cranium. Second, the cranial meninges.
Okay.
Third, the supportive cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. And finally, the ultimate gatekeeper, the blood-brain barrier.
Let's look closer at the meninges. We have the 3 layers, but that tough outer duramater isn't just a sac, is it? It's structural.
It is. The dura has 2 fibrous layers. The inner one, the meningeal layer, forms these crucial dural folds that project deep into the fissures of the brain.
So they're like anchors.
Exactly. They physically stabilize it. Think of the falx cerebri projecting between the cerebral hemispheres or the tentorium cerebelli supporting the occipital lobes. These folds physically restrict how much the brain can shift around.
Which is vital.
Vital in preventing damage during movement or, minor trauma.
So beneath that tough dura is the arachnoid mater, separated from the inner pia mater by the subarachnoid space.
And that space is crucial. It contains this delicate web-like meshwork, the arachnoid trabeculae, and most importantly, the CSF.
Right.
It's also where the arachnoid granulations act like these little one-way valves, pushing the CSF back into the big veins, the dural sinuses.
And the innermost pia mater.
That's the one that's tightly attached. It's highly vascular and sticks right to the brain's surface, following every single ridge and groove. It's like the brain's immediate nutrient-supplying skin.
Okay, let's talk about the fluid that makes the brain feel, well, weightless. The cerebrospinal fluid. It circulates through the 4 ventricles.
And its primary function is buoyancy. It's hard to overstate how important this is. The adult brain weighs roughly 1.4 kilograms, about 3 pounds in air. But because it's suspended in CSF, its effective weight drops to only about 50 grams.
50 grams? That's incredible.
It is. Without that flotation, the brain would physically crush itself against the floor of the cranium.
So where is this fluid generated, and how fast is it being replaced?
It is secreted by something called the choroid plexus. These are specialized ependymal cells covering permeable capillaries.
And they're just pumping it out constantly.
Constantly. About 500 milliliters of CSF every day. And since the total volume is only about 150 milliliters at any one time, the entire volume is exchanged roughly every 8 hours. It's a continuous production line.
What happens when that circulation path gets a block? From the lateral ventricles down to the third and out.
When that happens, the result is hydrocephalus, or water on the brain. The CSF keeps getting produced, so the ventricles are forced to expand, distorting the neural tissue.
And that's especially bad in infants.
Devastating. Their unfused skulls can actually enlarge to accommodate the fluid, which severely compresses the growing brain.
That just highlights the fragility of the system. Okay, last layer of protection, the blood-brain barrier, the BBB.
The gatekeeper.
It achieves its selectivity through tight junctions between the endothelial cells of the capillaries. It keeps the environment absolutely constant. But the strictness is relaxed in a few crucial areas.
Why would it do that?
Because the brain needs to monitor what's in the blood. So it's more permeable in parts of the hypothalamus, which monitors hormones, the pineal gland, and the choroid plexus itself.
It's important to remember these protections aren't foolproof. Our sources differentiate between two types of severe hemorrhage after trauma.
Right, a traumatic brain injury, or TDI, can lead to rapid compression. An epidural hemorrhage usually involves a broken artery.
So high pressure, fast onset.
Very fast. But a subdural hemorrhage is typically from a venous break. The pressure is lower, so the onset is much slower. It can take days or weeks for symptoms to show up. Okay, the house is locked down. Where's the main power breaker? Let's descend into the brainstem, the region that handles essential survival functions.
Starting at the base with the medulla oblongata, which connects the brain to the spinal cord. It houses crucial relay centers, like the olivary nuclei, which relay information up to the cerebellum.
But its most critical functional centers are dedicated to automation, right?
Absolutely. The medulla contains the autonomic centers. You have the cardiovascular centers regulating heart rate and blood flow, and the respiratory rhythmicity centers, which set the basic, non-negotiable pace of breathing.
So if the medulla is damaged, it's game over.
Life support fails.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Moving up from there, we hit the pons, the bridge. It literally connects the cerebellum to the brainstem.
And the pons is fascinating because it contains centers that modify the medulla's rhythms. It has respiratory centers that fine-tune the rate and depth of breathing based on, say, if you're talking or exercising.
Ah, so it's the manager, not just the on-off switch.
Precisely. It also houses nuclei for crucial cranial nerves.
Next up is the mesencephalon, or midbrain. This area seems dedicated to immediate, non-conscious reactions.
That's a perfect way to put it. You see that in the tectum, the roof of the midbrain, which holds the corpora quadrigemina.
And that's for reflexes.
Survival reflexes.
Yeah.
The superior colliculi handle visual reflexes, like turning your head when a shadow crosses your vision. The inferior colliculi handle auditory reflexes, turning your head toward a sudden, loud noise.
The jump scare center.
Pretty much. And deep inside, you find critical motor nuclei, notably the substantia nigra.
We'll come back to that one, I'm sure.
We will. It regulates motor output. Also present is the red nucleus for muscle tone and the cerebral peduncles, which are the main information highways carrying motor commands down.
Okay, let's shift gears and move up to the diencephalon, the deep central regulator.
The diencephalon has three main sections. The epithalamus is the roof containing the pineal gland.
Melatonin and sleep cycles.
Exactly. It helps regulate our day-night cycles.
Then we hit the thalamus. I always think of the thalamus not just as a relay station, but as an editor of reality.
That's a perfect analogy. The thalamus is the final relay and processing center for almost all ascending sensory information before it hits your conscious awareness. Smell is the one exception.
So it filters out the noise.
It's an information filter. It decides what signals are relevant enough to pass on. For instance, the lateral geniculate nucleus focuses on visual input, and the medial geniculate nucleus on auditory, ensuring those signals get priority.
And below that, the hypothalamus. This area seems disproportionately important given how small it is.
Oh, it is the maestro. The hypothalamus is the primary link between the nervous and endocrine systems. It has like 7 major functions.
Like what?
Controlling autonomic functions like heart rate, regulating body temperature, coordinating the nervous and endocrine systems.
It's also where our core behavioral drives come from, isn't it?
Yes, it produces drives like thirst and hunger. Plus, it secretes crucial hormones like ADH and oxytocin. And it's home to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, our internal clock.
Okay, moving posteriorly now to the cerebellum. If the cerebrum is the pilot who plans the route, the cerebellum is like the highly trained autopilot.
That's a great way to think about it. It corrects for turbulence and stores the muscle memory of flight patterns. And its anatomy reflects that function.
How so?
It has 2 large hemispheres, and its white matter is so highly branched it looks like a tree. They call it the arbor vitae, or tree of life.
So what are its 2 crucial functions?
First, adjusting postural muscles instantly to maintain balance and equilibrium.
Okay.
And second, programming, storing, and fine-tuning every voluntary and involuntary movement. When you type on a keyboard without looking, that's your cerebellum executing a learned program.
And when that fine-tuning mechanism fails, we see some very recognizable symptoms.
We do. Cerebellar dysfunction leads to ataxia, which is severe balance issues. More specifically, you see dysmetria, the inability to stop a movement precisely.
Right.
And this often shows up as an intention tremor, that oscillation you see as someone tries to reach for a target.
And that's exactly what they're testing for on the side of the road in a field sobriety test, isn't it?
That's precisely what they're testing, cerebellar integrity.
Now we arrive at the crown jewel, the cerebrum.
Right.
The massive, wrinkled surface responsible for conscious thought, memory, and all our complex planning.
The surface is the cerebral cortex, the gray matter. It's organized into gyri, the ridges, and sulci, the grooves, to maximize surface area.
And it's important to reinforce the principle of contralateral control here.
Absolutely. The motor and sensory cortices of one hemisphere are responsible for the opposite side of the body. We locate those critical centers using the central sulcus as a landmark.
So in front of it is motor, behind it is sensory.
Exactly. The primary motor cortex is the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe for voluntary movements. The primary sensory cortex is the postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe for touch, pain, and pressure.
But the real magic happens outside those primary areas,
Exactly.
right? In the association areas.
Yes, they are integration centers. The somatic sensory association area, for example, lets you comprehend what an object is just by its texture and shape without looking. The premotor cortex helps coordinate complex, learned movements.
Then we get to the higher order integrative centers, which are usually specialized in one hemisphere.
Typically the left. We have the general interpretive area or Gnostic area, which integrates all sensory association information. Damage here is fascinating. A person might understand the words sit and hear, but can't grasp the command sit here.
Wow, the context is gone.
Completely.
Yeah.
And right near that is Broca's area for the motor function of producing speech. And then the most complex area of all, the prefrontal cortex.
This is where abstract reasoning and prediction happen.
And deep emotional context because of its massive connectivity to the limbic system. The historical procedure of a prefrontal lobotomy tragically demonstrated its role in personality. Severing those connections often resulted in, well, profound emotional flattening.
For all this to work, everything has to communicate. I love the analogy for the 3 types of white matter fibers.
Yes, you can think of it in terms of communication flow. Association fibers are like internal memos. They connect areas within the same hemisphere.
Okay.
Commercial fibers are the inter-office phone calls. They connect the 2 hemispheres. The most famous is the corpus callosum, with over 200 million axons.
And the 3rd type?
Projection fibers. These are like the CEO's letters. They link the entire cerebrum down to the lower brain regions and the spinal cord.
Deep within this communication network are the basal nuclei. What do these masses of gray matter do?
They handle the subconscious control of muscle tone and help coordinate learned motor patterns. Think about the rhythm of your arm and leg cycles when you walk. You don't think about it.
The basal nuclei just do it.
They just do it.
And the failure of the basal nuclei leads us directly to Parkinson's disease.
That's right. Parkinson's is caused by the death of dopamine-producing neurons in the substantia nigra, which we mentioned in the midbrain. Without that regulating dopamine, the basal nuclei become pathologically overactive. And this leads to increased muscle tone, stiffness, and that characteristic tremor at rest. It's a malfunction of the subconscious motor program.
Finally, we turn to the limbic system, the functional grouping for our emotional states and memory.
Key structures here are the hippocampus, which is absolutely essential for forming long-term memories, and the amygdaloid body, the integration center for emotions like fear and rage.
And the most devastating memory disease of all is tied to this system.
Alzheimer's disease. It's characterized by progressive memory loss, which correlates with the loss of cortical neurons, especially in the frontal and temporal lobes, and a significant deterioration of the hippocampus. The architecture of memory just erodes.
That brings us to our last major component, the cranial nerves. 12 pairs. Let's focus on the most functionally significant ones.
Sure. We can start with the 2 sensory nerves essential for consciousness. NI, olfactory for smell, and NI, optic for vision. NI is unique because it's the only nerve attached directly to the cerebrum.
We have several motor nerves for eye movement, but the nerves that are mixed, both sensory and motor, are often the most vital.
Oh yeah. Take NV trigeminal, the largest mixed nerve. Its 3 branches provide massive sensory input from the face and motor control for chewing.
And when it fails, that's trigeminal neuralgia.
The intense pain of tic douloureux, yes. Then there's NVE, facial, which controls all the muscles of facial expression. Inflammation there can cause Bell's palsy, leading to temporary facial paralysis.
And what about the most vital autonomic nerve of all?
That would have to be NX vagus, the wanderer. It's a key mixed nerve providing extensive visceral autonomic control throughout the neck, thorax, and abdomen, heart rate, respiration, digestion. It's a huge player.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground, from the protective structures inward to the life-preserving brainstem, then up to the higher processing centers, and finally out to the cranial nerves.
It really shows how the brain is structured, from those obligatory survival mechanisms all the way up to the highly versatile command centers.
So what does this all mean for immediate application? Let's consider the importance of cranial reflexes.
These are simple, measurable actions, like the corneal reflex, where the eye blinks instantly if it's lightly touched, or the vestibulo-ocular reflex, which stabilizes your vision as your head moves.
They seem so simple, but they're not.
They're not. They require complex nerve pathways and nuclei deep within the brainstem.
So testing those seemingly simple reflexes gives clinicians a quick, vital, non-negotiable snapshot of the functional integrity of those deep survival structures, the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain.
It ensures that the organic supercomputer is fundamentally working and ready to respond, long before the conscious cerebrum even processes the information. A simple twitch of the eye can reveal the integrity of the most profound control centers in your entire body.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the most fascinating organ in the human body. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.